Psychology experiments that are just everywhere. They become these stories we tell ourselves about who we are. But what if one of the most famous stories about human evil got the most important part completely wrong? All right, let's get into it. This question, man, it's the one that kicked off one of the most talked about, most controversial experiments in history. The whole idea was that an evil situation can just flip a switch and turn good people into monsters. But is it really that simple? Let's see. Okay, so our story really starts right here, with this paper published back in 1973. It was all about an experiment from a couple years earlier, in 71, led by a psychologist named Philip Zimbardo. It was called the Stanford Prison Experiment, and while it was supposed to be about the psychology of prisons, what it found seemed to say something much, much darker about all of us. To really get why this thing was such a big deal, and, why we're still talking about it, we have to look at how they set it all up. The detail they went into was meant to make it feel real, and, well, it worked a little too well. So the setup itself was pretty straightforward, but wow, was it powerful. They took a bunch of normal, healthy male college students, all screened to make sure they were psychologically stable, and then basically with a coin toss, they made half of them prisoners and the other half guards. The whole thing was supposed to last for 2 weeks. Now get this, the simulation kicked off before the students even saw the prison. The guys assigned to be prisoners were unexpectedly arrested at their own homes by actual police officers. They were booked at a real station, the whole shebang. This wasn't just playing pretend. It was designed to make them feel confused, powerless, right from the jump. And that's where this comes in. The next step was all about stripping away their identities. Prisoners got these weird, ill-fitting smocks, no underwear, and were only ever called by their number. The guards, they got these military-style uniforms and reflective sunglasses, so you couldn't even see their eyes. The whole point was to make everyone forget who they were and just become the role. So the stage was set. You have perfectly normal people, you give them these roles, and you put them in this super intense, immersive situation. What happened next? Well, that became the stuff of legend and really cemented this powerful theory about how we all behave. And it happened fast, like shockingly fast. Some of the guards started to really lean into their role, harassing the prisoners, making up these cruel punishments. And the prisoners, who were, their equals just days before, they started to break down. They became totally submissive, and a lot of them got really, really distressed. I mean, just listen to what this prisoner said. He felt like he was literally losing himself. For him, it stopped being an experiment. It was just a prison. That's how real and how psychologically damaging this whole thing got. 6. That's it. 6 days. The whole 2-week experiment had to be shut down after less than a week. Things had just spiraled so far out of control that Zimbardo and his team knew it was too dangerous to let it go on. And all of this boiled down to one really powerful and kinda terrifying idea: the Lucifer effect. The idea that you, me, anyone, could become a monster if you just put us in the wrong situation. That our personality, our character, it doesn't really matter. The situation is king. And for decades, that was the story everyone believed. But here's the thing about science, right? It's always questioning. It's always re-examining. And about 30 years later, a new group of researchers decided it was time to put this iconic study and its very famous conclusion to the test. What if we're not just these passive little puppets of our circumstances? I mean, what if things like choice and identity and even resistance play a way bigger role than anyone thought? So fast forward to 2001. 2 psychologists, Alex Haslam and Steve Reicher, teamed up with the BBC to create their own prison simulation. But they weren't just trying to copy the original. They had a totally different idea about what really makes people tick in these kinds of groups. Okay, so this slide right here gets to the absolute heart of it. Zimbardo's study said we just passively slip into our roles. But Haslam and Reicher thought, no, wait a minute. Their idea was that for a role to actually mean something, we have to actively identify with that group. It's not automatic. It's a choice. And this new way of thinking, it led to a completely different result. A result that tells a much more complicated and, honestly, a more hopeful story about how we deal with power. What happened in the BBC study was just fascinating. The participants didn't just fall in line. The prisoners actually stuck together. They supported each other, and they pushed back against the guards' authority, pretty successfully too. And the guards, well, they were uncomfortable with having all that power. They couldn't get on the same page. The whole system didn't collapse because of tyranny. It collapsed because there wasn't enough of it. So what's going on here?
Well, it all comes down to this really cool idea called social identity theory. Basically, it says a huge part of who we are comes from the groups we feel like we belong to. And for us to act like a member of a group, whether it's a prison guard or a fan of a football team, we have to actually feel connected to it. We have to buy in. And this, right here, is the absolute game changer. The Stanford experiment made it seem like our response to a situation is automatic, like a reflex. But the BBC study showed us that we have a choice. We have agency. We can choose to identify with a role and embrace it, or we can choose to identify with our friends and our fellow group members and resist it.
So, what's the takeaway from all this? We've got two famous prison studies with totally different outcomes. The modern view isn't that one was right and the other was wrong. It's that when you put them together, you get a much smarter, more nuanced picture of who we are. So here are the big things to remember. One, yeah, situations are powerful. They can mess with our heads, but they are not all powerful. Our response isn't automatic. Two, tyranny isn't inevitable. It happens when people choose to identify with and support an oppressive group. And three, maybe most importantly, resistance is natural. When people come together with a shared identity, they can absolutely stand up to power. So in the end, the story isn't that bad places make good people do bad things. It's that we have the capacity for both. We can be tyrants or we can be resistors. So the real question isn't what some evil place will do to you. It's what will you and the groups you're a part of choose to do with the power you have.